Have you ever had someone in human resources tell you to document everything? Most people hear that as a warning. I heard it as permission. At the time, I had no idea that one sentence would end up costing my company 2 managers, 1 HR representative, and well over $500,000. My name is Daniel, and 3 years ago I worked as a senior operations coordinator for a logistics company just outside Chicago. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid well. I liked my co-workers, I knew the systems better than almost anyone else, and I genuinely enjoyed solving problems. Things changed when our department got a new operations manager named Karen. Karen believed that every employee was trying to avoid work. If you arrived 5 minutes early, she wanted to know why you weren't already at your desk. If you stayed late to finish something, she'd accuse you of poor time management. If you asked a question, she'd somehow turn it into a lecture about accountability. Within 2 months, morale had completely collapsed. People stopped volunteering ideas. Nobody stayed late to help. Everyone did exactly what they were told because anything extra usually came back to hurt them. Unfortunately for Karen, I had a habit she absolutely hated. Whenever she gave me instructions that sounded unusual, I asked for clarification in writing. Not because I didn't understand. Because experience had taught me that verbal instructions had a funny way of changing after something went wrong. Karen hated emails. She preferred hallway conversations because there was no record. One Monday morning she called me into her office. She closed the door, folded her arms, and stared at me for several uncomfortable seconds. Then she said, "Daniel, people are starting to think you're difficult." I smiled politely. "I'm sorry you feel that way." "No," she replied. "You're creating unnecessary paperwork." I knew exactly what she meant. Every questionable instruction she gave me ended up confirmed through email because I always followed up with a simple message asking if I understood correctly. She couldn't deny what she'd written later. That bothered her. She leaned forward. "From now on, stop emailing me every little detail." I nodded. "So you'd prefer verbal instructions?" "Exactly." I thanked her and left. 10 minutes later I sent a single email. "Just confirming our conversation this morning. Going forward, you would prefer that I receive work instructions verbally unless otherwise requested." She replied with only 3 words. "Correct. Thank you." That tiny email would become the first piece of evidence. A week later everything exploded. Karen instructed our entire team to skip one of the required inventory verification steps because we were behind schedule. Everyone looked uncomfortable. The process existed for a reason. Skipping it increased the chance of expensive shipping mistakes. I quietly asked, "Should I document that we're temporarily bypassing verification?" She glared at me. I said no more unnecessary emails. So I didn't send one. I simply followed her instruction. Exactly. 3 days later dozens of incorrect shipments reached customers. Complaints poured in. Returns started arriving. Corporate wanted answers. Karen walked into the meeting room acting completely shocked. She claimed nobody had informed her that verification had been skipped. Then she looked directly at me. Daniel was responsible for that process. For a moment the room became completely silent. Every eye turned toward me. I calmly asked one question. "Would you like me to explain exactly what happened?" Karen interrupted immediately. "No. Just answer whether you skipped the verification." "Yes." "And why did you do that?" "Because you instructed me to." Her face didn't change. She simply smiled. I never said that. The meeting ended with corporate requesting written statements from everyone involved. That afternoon I received an email from Human Resources. The subject line read Employee Conduct Review. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I already knew where this was going. Someone was trying to make me the fall guy. The next morning I walked into HR carrying nothing except a notebook. The HR representative introduced herself, smiled professionally, and asked me to explain what happened. I told the truth. Karen instructed us to skip verification. HR asked whether I had any proof. I explained that Karen specifically instructed me to stop requesting written confirmation. The HR representative sighed. Then she gave me the advice that changed everything. Daniel, from this moment forward, I recommend you document absolutely everything. She probably meant it as routine advice. She had no idea how seriously I was about to take those words. I looked her straight in the eyes and smiled. Everything. She nodded. Everything. That was exactly what I needed to hear. The very next morning, I bought a brand new notebook on my way to work. Nothing fancy. Just a plain black notebook with numbered pages. At exactly 8:01 a.m. I wrote my first entry. Arrived at work. Karen entered the office at 8:07 carrying a coffee. Team meeting started at 8:15. That was it. Simple. Objective. No opinions. No emotions. Just facts. From that day forward, I documented everything. Every meeting. Every verbal instruction. Every schedule change. Every policy reminder. Every conversation that affected my work. If Karen stopped by my desk and said, "Handle the Johnson shipment first," I'd write the time, the exact wording, and who was standing nearby. After every important conversation, I'd send a short email. Per our discussion at 10:42 this morning, I will prioritize the Johnson shipment before the Smith order. I wasn't asking permission. I was documenting. Karen noticed almost immediately. She walked over to my desk that afternoon. "Are you seriously taking notes every time I talk?" I looked up calmly. HR recommended I document everything. Her smile disappeared. That's not what they meant. I'd rather not guess what they meant. She rolled her eyes and walked away. The notebook stayed open on my desk every single day. Within a week, people started noticing. One coworker whispered, "What are you writing all the time?" I smiled. "The truth." He laughed. I wasn't joking. 2 weeks later, another problem appeared. Karen announced that nobody was allowed to leave exactly at 5 anymore. If there's still work to do, you're expected to stay until everything is finished. Someone asked if the overtime had been approved. Karen answered, "We'll figure that out later." I wrote those exact words down. "We'll figure that out later." At 5:03 that evening, she walked past my desk. "Daniel, stay another hour." "Has overtime been approved?" "It doesn't need approval." I wrote that sentence down too. She watched me writing. "Seriously? You told me to document everything." "I didn't." "No. HR did." She turned around and left without another word. Over the next month, people stayed late almost every night. Nobody complained. Everyone assumed payroll would fix it eventually. Payroll didn't. When the checks arrived, dozens of overtime hours were missing. Employees flooded Karen's office. She blamed payroll. Payroll blamed department management. Nobody accepted responsibility. Then HR scheduled another meeting. This time the room was packed. Karen, HR, payroll, department supervisors, and nearly 20 employees. The HR representative asked if anyone had proof that overtime had been required. The room stayed silent. Then I slowly opened my notebook. I believe I might. Karen's face changed instantly. I calmly read my notes. September 14, Karen instructed employees to remain until all orders were complete. September 15, Karen stated overtime approval was unnecessary. September 16, Karen repeated the same instruction in front of 4 witnesses. September 17, Karen reminded the team that leaving on time would affect performance evaluations. I wasn't finished. Then I opened my email folder. Every follow-up message. Every timestamp. Every response. Every confirmation. The HR representative asked if those emails were authentic. Payroll verified them immediately. Karen interrupted. He's taking everything out of context. I answered quietly. Then let's read the entire email chain. Nobody objected. Because there was nothing to hide. Karen had replied to several of those emails herself. Sometimes with only one word. Correct. Other times with proceed. Or simply yes. Each reply confirmed another instruction. The room became uncomfortably quiet. HR turned toward Karen. Did you tell employees overtime approval wasn't necessary? Karen hesitated. I don't remember. I slid my notebook across the table. It was September 15 at 5:03 p.m. The witness sitting beside me nodded. I remember that conversation too. Another employee spoke up. So do I. Then another. And another. Suddenly, people who had stayed quiet for months realized they weren't alone anymore. Stories started pouring out. Unpaid overtime. Policy changes. Public humiliation. Threats about performance reviews. Everything. HR looked overwhelmed. Karen looked terrified. For the first time since she'd become our manager, she wasn't controlling the room. She wasn't interrupting people. She wasn't changing the story. The facts were controlling the conversation. The meeting ended without a decision. HR said they needed time to investigate. Karen walked past me as everyone left. She leaned close enough that nobody else could hear. You think you've won? I closed my notebook. I don't think anything. You've made a huge mistake. I looked her straight in the eye. I wrote that down too. She froze for a second. Then she walked away without saying another word. That afternoon, I added one final sentence to my notebook. Manager stated, "You've made a huge mistake," immediately following HR investigation meeting. I had no idea that entry would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. Because what Karen did next wasn't just unethical. It was illegal. The next Monday started like any other. I walked into the office at 8 o'clock, grabbed a cup of coffee, and opened my notebook. Before I even logged into my computer, Karen appeared beside my desk. Conference room. Now. Her voice was calm. Too calm. When I walked in, she wasn't alone. The HR representative was already sitting at the table with a folder in front of her. Karen smiled. Daniel, we've received several complaints that your constant note-taking is creating a hostile work environment. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked, who filed the complaints? HR answered, we're not able to disclose that. That's fine. Could you explain what behavior was considered hostile? Karen jumped in before HR could answer. People feel like you're trying to trap them. I nodded slowly. So documenting my own work is now considered hostile? No, HR replied carefully. It's the way you're doing it. I see. I opened my notebook. The room went silent. Karen sighed loudly. You're doing it again. Yes, I said. I'm documenting this meeting, as instructed by HR. The HR representative shifted in her chair. I suppose that's reasonable. Karen looked at her in disbelief. The meeting ended after 15 awkward minutes with no warning, no discipline, and no explanation. As I stood up to leave, Karen said something she probably thought was harmless. From now on, any documentation you create needs my approval first. I stopped walking. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? Your notes. Your emails. Anything you document. I want to review it before you keep it. I looked at HR. Is that a company policy? She hesitated. No, not officially. Karen quickly added, it's a department expectation. I smiled, could you email me that expectation? Karen's face tightened. We don't need an email. Then I'll continue following the company's written policy. Neither of them had an answer. That afternoon, something strange happened. One of my co-workers, Mike, walked over to my desk looking nervous. He leaned in and whispered, Karen just asked me if you've ever written anything about her. I looked at him. And what did you say? I told her I had no idea. I thanked him. Then I wrote the conversation down. Over the next few days, more co-workers quietly approached me. Karen was asking everyone the same questions. What does Daniel write? Has he shown you his notebook? Do you think he's collecting evidence? She wasn't managing the department anymore. She was trying to find out what I knew. Then came Friday. At exactly 4:47 p.m. I returned from the warehouse and noticed my notebook wasn't on my desk. I always left it in the same place. Always. I searched every drawer. Nothing. I checked the conference room. Nothing. Finally, I walked into Karen's office. Have you seen my notebook? Without looking up from her computer, she answered, no. Her answer came too quickly. I thanked her and left. Instead of arguing, I walked straight to the IT office. Every hallway in our building had security cameras. I asked whether they could preserve the footage from my department before it was automatically deleted. The technician asked why. I simply replied, personal property has gone missing. He nodded. I'll save today's recordings. An hour later, my phone rang. It was the IT manager. Daniel. I think you should come down here. When I arrived, he played the footage. At 3:18 p.m. while I was in the warehouse, Karen walked into my office area. She looked around to make sure nobody was watching. Then she picked up my notebook, opened it, flipped through several pages, placed it inside a blue folder, and walked into her office. I watched the video twice. Then a third time. The IT manager looked at me. Do you want a copy? I smiled. Please. 10 minutes later, I walked back toward Karen's office. This time I wasn't alone. The HR representative was standing there talking to her. Perfect timing. I knocked gently. Karen looked up. What is it now? I asked one simple question. Are you absolutely certain you haven't seen my notebook? She looked directly at me. I'm absolutely certain. I turned toward HR. I'd like to report that my manager has just made a false statement during an active workplace matter. Karen frowned. What are you talking about? Without saying another word, I placed a USB drive on the desk. The security footage is on there. Neither of them moved. I continued. It shows you removing my notebook from my desk at exactly 3:18 this afternoon. Karen's face lost all color. HR slowly reached for the USB drive. The room became completely silent. For nearly 30 seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, HR looked at Karen. Is there any reason security footage would show you taking an employee's personal notebook? Karen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, she had no story. And that was when I realized something. This wasn't about proving I was right anymore. This was about proving they had been lying all along. The following Tuesday, I arrived at work expecting tension. Instead, I found silence. Karen's office door was closed. The blinds were drawn. No morning meeting. No emails. No lectures. Just silence. Around 9 o'clock, an email popped up from HR asking me to report to the executive conference room. Not the regular meeting room. The executive conference room. That was unusual. When I walked in, I immediately noticed 3 people I had never met before. The company's legal counsel. The regional operations director. And someone introduced only as an external compliance investigator. Karen wasn't there. Neither was the HR representative. The investigator smiled politely. Daniel, thank you for coming. We'd like you to walk us through everything from the beginning. For the next 2 hours, I didn't exaggerate. I didn't speculate. I simply told the truth. Every instruction. Every skipped procedure. Every unpaid overtime request. Every email. Every notebook entry. Every meeting. Every witness. When they asked a question, I answered it. When I didn't know something, I said I didn't know. The investigator stopped me at one point. You've kept records for all of this. I nodded. I was instructed to document everything. He looked down at his notes and smiled. Looks like you took that advice seriously. I did. Then he asked a question I wasn't expecting. Did anyone ever ask you to destroy your notes? I paused. Actually, someone had. I remembered the meeting where Karen wanted to approve my documentation before I kept it. I remembered her asking co-workers what I had written. I remembered my notebook disappearing. I even remembered her denying she'd taken it while security footage proved otherwise. The investigator slowly nodded. That's important. Very important. Then he asked for copies of everything. My notebook. My emails. My calendar. My overtime records. Even screenshots of my work messages. I had all of it neatly organized. He looked genuinely impressed. By lunchtime, rumors were spreading across the office. People had seen investigators walking around. Employees were being interviewed one by one. Payroll staff. Warehouse supervisors. Customer service representatives. Even former employees had apparently been contacted. By the end of the day, everyone knew something big was happening. Wednesday morning, Karen still hadn't returned. Nobody knew where she was. Officially, she was working remotely. Unofficially, people were whispering that she'd spent most of Tuesday inside the executive offices. Thursday afternoon, another email arrived. Mandatory department meeting. Attendance required. When we entered the conference room, the regional director was waiting for us. Not Karen. Not HR. Just him. He stood quietly for a moment before speaking. Effective immediately, Karen is no longer employed by this company. The room was completely still. No applause. No celebration. Just shock. Then he continued. The company has also accepted the resignation of our human resources business partner. That got everyone's attention. 2 people. Gone. In the same announcement. He took a deep breath. We have identified multiple violations involving overtime practices, documentation procedures, retaliation concerns, and policy enforcement. Then he looked directly at the entire department. I want to make something very clear. No employee will ever be disciplined for accurately documenting workplace events. I couldn't help smiling. That single sentence changed everything. The meeting ended after only 10 minutes. As people walked out, co-workers started stopping by my desk. One after another. Mike shook my hand. You actually did it? Another co-worker laughed. I thought you were being paranoid. Someone else said quietly, I wish I'd started documenting things years ago. For the first time in months, the office actually felt relaxed. People were talking again. Laughing again. Helping each other again. It felt like someone had finally opened a window after months of stale air. I thought the story was over. I was wrong. Because 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter at home. It wasn't from the company. It was from Karen's attorney. She was threatening to sue me for defamation. I read the letter twice. Then I smiled. Because unlike Karen, I had receipts. Every email. Every timestamp. Every witness. Every notebook entry. Every security video. Every payroll record. Every official investigation finding. She wasn't suing a rumor. She was trying to sue documented facts. And that was about to become the biggest mistake of her entire career. When the certified letter arrived, I wasn't angry. I wasn't scared. I was confused. Karen wasn't accusing me of lying. She wasn't claiming the investigation was fake. Her attorney argued that my documentation had damaged her professional reputation. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I called the attorney listed on the letter. He answered on the second ring. I introduced myself and asked one simple question. Have you personally reviewed the company's investigation before sending this letter? There was a brief pause. No. Have you seen the security footage? Another pause. No. Have you read my documentation? No. I think you should. He thanked me politely and ended the call. That was it. No argument. No threats. Just a short conversation. The following week, I received another letter. This one was much shorter. Karen's attorney was no longer demanding money. Instead, he requested copies of any documents I intended to rely on if legal action continued. My lawyer smiled when he read it. They're phishing. What does that mean? They expected you to panic. Instead, we organized everything. Every notebook. Every email. Every witness statement. Every payroll correction. Every official memo. Every security recording. Everything was placed into chronological order. Looking at it all together was almost surreal. What had started as one sentence from HR had turned into hundreds of pages of evidence. My lawyer looked at the stack. I've seen cases with less documentation than this. A week later, something unexpected happened. Karen's attorney called again. His tone was completely different. He sounded almost embarrassed. "Mr. Daniel, after reviewing the materials, my client wishes to withdraw all claims." I wasn't surprised. "You mean there won't be a lawsuit?" "Correct." "And that's the end of it?" "Yes." I thanked him for letting me know. After I hung up, I just sat there for a minute. Months of stress, meetings, accusations, late nights, it was finally over. Or so I thought. About a month later, the regional director invited me to lunch. It wasn't disciplinary. It wasn't another interview. It was simply lunch. Halfway through the meal, he looked at me and smiled. "Can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course." "What made you start documenting everything before HR ever told you to?" I laughed. "My previous manager." He looked surprised. I explained. Years earlier, another supervisor had blamed me for a mistake I'd never made. There were no emails. No witnesses. No records. Just his word against mine. From that day forward, I promised myself something. Never rely on memory when facts can be recorded. The director nodded slowly. "That habit probably saved your career." I smiled. "It did more than that." He reached into his briefcase and handed me a folder. Inside was an offer. A promotion. Senior Process Improvement Manager. A significant raise. Better hours. And one sentence I'll never forget. "We need more people who solve problems with facts instead of opinions." I accepted immediately. Today, I still carry a notebook. Not because I'm afraid. Not because I expect people to lie. Because documentation isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about protecting the truth. Every new employee I train asks why I write everything down. I always tell them the same story. Not every detail. Just the lesson. If someone ever tells you to document everything, smile, open a notebook, and do exactly what they asked. Because sometimes, malicious compliance isn't about revenge. It's about letting the truth win all by itself.